The following broadcast is intended for a right-wing audience. Communist discretion is advised.
Welcome to the show. I am your host, LB Muniz, and this is the Been Awake podcast for better sense making. Well, I know it's been a little bit since the last time that we spoke. It's honestly been a little bit since I've even since I've really had the motivation to sit down and record my thoughts about what's happening in the world. And there's a few reasons for that we're going to get into. I looked to see what was one of the last things that I spoke about, that I wrote about. One is a nice little article, a meditation on fear, that's worth reading at beenawake.com. But the last podcast episode I did was entitled, Is Peace Worth a Chance? Something to that effect. Is peace worth a chance? And I was saying how man, it kind of seems like I'm sounding a bit like a Trump fanboy these days. But wouldn't it be great if there was peace in between Ukraine and Russia? And now, all these months later, we're still asking, wouldn't it be great if there was peace between Ukraine and Russia? Wouldn't it be great if there could be some sort of lasting peace between Hamas and the Israeli government? We're wondering if Palestine will even exist in a couple of years. And a lot of people are wondering whether it should. Others are hoping it doesn't. And of course, there's plenty of people also who want the opposite to be the case. They don't want Israel to exist in a couple of years. None of them actually know what's going to happen. Some people are closer to the wheels of power than others. But circling all of that, I think, in a very real way, is a question about us, about you and me. Before I even ask this question, you're going to reflexively say that you know the answer to it. See, I've been thinking a lot about what I intended to do when I started Been Awake for Better Sense, but the Been Awake project for better sense making. When I bothered to buy this domain, get the right handles on social media, and create a Substack. I've always been, and frankly, how much my life has changed between then and now. Not the least of which is I've gotten married, but so many other things have happened in the interim. There were, not too long ago in my life, I would always be itching for a political fight. And if I'm going to be honest with you, I tend to run away from them now. I'm not so much the person anymore. I'm not so much that person anymore who wants to insert his opinion into every single conversation that occurs. Dare I say I've grown up a little bit. But that's not to say I don't have opinions or that I don't think what I have to say matters. And so we circle back to, why did I even bother to create this stuff to begin with? And if I'm being honest with you, part of that has to do with how much I think so many other people in the space, whether I am prone to agree with them or not, are just not the best kinds of people. And I wonder sometimes if to have what it takes to make it in media, you can't really be that good of a person. These and so many other things have kind of kept me away from the microphone. It's kept me away from the keyboard. It's kept me hesitant to speak my thoughts and crystallize them in such a way. And I'll tell you the last time that I was incredibly motivated and that I really wanted to start talking again, because thank you, there are some people out there who wonder where I've gone or wonder why, whether I'm going to be doing this anymore or when that's going to be happening again. And I'm sorry for the long preamble. I promise we'll get into some stuff. But the last time that I was really motivated was probably on or about September 9th, 2025. And then on September 10th, Charlie Kirk was assassinated. And there was this part of me that's like, oh, this would be a great thing to talk about. And being honest with you, there was a greater part of me that was like, what would I even say? I gave thoughts in, private messages and talking to people privately, and I'll get into those now. But like so many people, I felt like we crossed something of a Rubicon at that moment in modern American politics. Everybody kind of realized what the game actually was. And as I sit and scroll and listen, I realized everything was so much easier. Everything was so much easier about politics when I thought libertarianism was the path forward for everybody, that it could save humanity. And it was easier from the standpoint of you didn't what libertarianism I think provided to a lot of young men who grew up around the same time I did. Now trust me, I understand the landscape is completely different. And part of what I want to try and do is apply who I was then and who I am now to these same sorts of questions. But one thing about that ideology gave I think, and this is what I've expressed in different places, is I think that it gave young men who were not left wing, right, who weren't leftists, who weren't egalitarians, who didn't find any benefit to socialism or communism or any of those sorts of things, but who also understood that there was something wrong about the Republican messaging, about the Chamber of Commerce, big business, everything sort of, everything, all this managed trade, outsourcing, all these things. Well, that's just not free market, right? And of course, I'm not saying that it is. I'm just saying that that's what the argument that we would say is like, well, that's not a free market. There's problems here. There are things that we could fix. And so, what the libertarian movement at that time under Ron Paul gave to a lot of young men was a space in which we could exist, separating ourselves from the conservatives that had screwed things up or got us involved in the Great War on Terror, but also from the leftists. And if you ask me, and you're listening to this, so I'm assuming that you are, what changed everything was COVID, because we saw during the lockdowns, we saw during the pandemic what government force actually is and what it looks like, both in the direct sense and in the proximal sense. And not enough people are willing to look at the proximal causes of what that was. Friendships ruined, families torn apart. Forget including family members who died, but just families having arguments about it. And it was then that I think I gave myself the best piece of advice that I've ever done, which was I'm not going to go to war with people who I care about. And I still hold that to be true. And then, like I said, Charlie Kirk was assassinated. I was not, and still am not, a big Turning Point USA person. I did once upon a time apply for a job with them. They never got back to me, but that was a long time ago. No hard feelings or anything. I'm just saying I'm not going to pretend like I wasn't. I knew who they were. They kind of started to exist and gain, because Charlie, I'm not that much younger than. Am I older than him? I think I might be older than Charlie Kirk was. We're around the same age, is what I'm trying to say. By like a year or two. So TPUSA was really starting to gain steam as I was exiting that scene. And there was a point in my life where I thought, oh, maybe I'll stay in it. So, and at the time, like I said, committed libertarian, I wasn't really interested in a lot of these arguments that were being put forth by the MAGA community. I didn't support Donald Trump in 2016. I did support him during his last run for reasons that I've talked about. But Charlie Kirk was assassinated, and things got pretty real, I think, for a lot of us. See, there was the proximal sense of what happened during the lockdowns when we realized what other people are willing to do, strangers and people that we know. But that doesn't quite hold the same thing as watching a man be assassinated in full high definition. Pretty jarring. I wouldn't recommend looking at it, but I know we all did. And the reason why, for me, it was so jarring was because if you were to talk to me, 21, 22 years old, somebody like Charlie Kirk is who I would have wanted to be. Somebody with a huge platform, great amount of influence, pushing forward ideas that I believed in a peaceful and civilized manner. For whatever disagreements I might have with him. I said I was never somebody who listened to all of his speeches. If I saw him on if I saw him being interviewed by somebody I liked, I might listen to that. Or if there was a big clip around, I would listen to that. But somebody who was willing to sit and talk in a civilized manner was shot. And we all know what happened next. People cheered. There's a certain sickness that can overtake us in political discourse, that can overtake you. Maybe it has. Maybe you're listening to this and you're going to get mad at me for what I'm about to say. There's a certain sickness that will overtake you when you really start to wish death upon your enemies. Or you wish your enemies could be wiped out. Now, don't feel too bad. It's only human. Something deeply programmed into us. For the people we like to be around and the people we don't like to not be around. Without that, we couldn't survive as a species. But it can consume you. It can consume you like so many other things can. And a lot of us saw, I'm not trying to like draw parallels here, but I'm just saying we were around the same age, grew up in a similar area, and had, generally speaking, overlapping views on many subjects. And when he was assassinated, people, of course, condemned the reaction to it and condemned the violence, but a lot more people didn't. And even more people laughed quietly at jokes about it. And just as many people never bothered to think about what that would mean for the person sitting in the room who doesn't want to get into a fight, doesn't want to spoil a nice evening. But yeah, agreed with him, thought he was doing decent work most of the time. And we all saw that in that moment, they would do the same thing for us if that was us. And so that was honestly one of the last times that I was going to sit down and record a podcast episode, and I couldn't at that time. It really affected me. Had me twisted over it for a few weeks, like I think a lot of people. I'm not saying I'm special, I'm just talking about it. But we're asking ourselves all these big questions in the aftermath, and we're almost a year into, right? We're almost a year into the first run, Donald Trump's second end of the first year of Donald Trump's second term. And I think a lot of us are wondering what the heck is going to happen. I think we were all very excited at the beginning, and now we're not so sure what's going to happen. And I think that's a good thing, because ultimately we can't rely on politics or the political machine to actually save us, because that's the sickness at the end of the day. going back to what I was saying before, that's what libertarian offers. Like, well, we can move to a world beyond politics. I used to say that we can move beyond politics. And then the lockdown showed us that no, you can't. For years, the left was saying everything is political, and we would say, no, come on, there's certain things that aren't. And it turns out, I don't know that they were right about it, but certainly they created their reality in that respect. We talked about, and then it all became about the fact that there was this new burgeoning group. You might have, if, I know my audience, I know people who listen to this, my audience, my friends and strangers on the internet who are also my friends who listen to this will, some of you might not even know what I'm talking about when it comes to this. But then there was suddenly this huge push from a certain segment of conservative thought against what they were calling the woke right. Now, why is this space called beenawake.com? It's because I'm not woke. I've been awake. Right? I've been doing this for a minute. That was the whole idea at the beginning, because we all crystallized what we didn't like about the current manifestation of the left, and we talked about the woke. We understood that that was a specific thing. Well, now there's the woke left and the woke right. I looked around and suddenly realized that all the people that I had been listening to were being labeled woke right. And so I had to ask myself, is that what I am? And if you're wondering, what is it? I'm not even sure. I don't even want to pull up a definition to talk about it. I'm just kind of like I said, it's been a while since we've talked, so my mind's kind of bouncing all over because there's all these things happening in the world, in the political conversation. We had a major political figure be assassinated. We still don't know exactly what happened. An investigation or something. We still don't know about anything about the guy that tried to kill Trump a year before. Congress can't seem to do anything except what they always do. Oops, sorry. And people are wondering what the next move is. Like what could actually be happening? What could actually happen that's good that's going to come next? I've watched, and I'm sure you have too, as people have, I don't know if devolved is the right word, but there's the factionalizing is a real thing. But people have factionalized in the online right community. And it seems like, and I don't know how much of it is people trying to keep an audience, people captured by an audience, and people who really believe the crap that they're pushing. Every other day, it's like we're fighting. Either you're fighting with Joel Berry or against him. Either you're fighting James Lindsay or you're going after Orrin McIntyre. Some of you might not even know who those people are. What are we? That's what I was kind of alluding to before. These big questions that are before us. What are we as a country, as a people, and as individuals? Who are we together? What does that mean? If I'm being honest, I've thrown myself pretty heavily into the game of chess over the last year. That's really taken up a lot of my time, and I found it to be quite enjoying. For the first time in my adult life, I had a glimpse of what other people get on a daily basis. In that, I was always somebody, you can ask anybody who's known me for a long time, I've always been somebody obsessed over politics and the news cycle and the latest political machinations and journalistic intrigue. And then suddenly I kind of fell back into a game I played a little bit as a child, and I found it to be such a breath of fresh air. Here was something I could obsess over and it not make me enemies. It wouldn't make me crazy. Well, it does make you crazy, right? If you play the game, you basically lose half the time, even if you're good, even if you're getting better, and so that can be a pretty tricky thing to get used to. But I found that bit of an escape in that, and it was great. And so it makes me wonder, what should I try to do when it comes to synthesizing large ideas for you and for me, for people who want to try and make better sense of the world. And that's one of the reasons why I'm grateful I never went too hard one direction or another, even when I was more ideologically committed to something. I still wanted to make my project at least sound neutral. I guess what I'm trying to say in this first episode back is, it's okay to not have the answers to every question. What's more important is realizing that you don't have the answers, and to give yourself a chance and give other people a chance to an extent. Knowing where and when to fight, knowing where and when to be silent, and knowing where the ultimate truth lies. I said before earlier in this episode that, I thought libertarianism was the answer, and I realized that is not the case. God is. Religion is. Separating ourselves from what some would consider to be ancient and obsolete myths, ironically, has created the sort of vacuum that ultimately recreated basic, not basic, primitive belief structures being put back into place. Let me explain. I know that wasn't clear. I was reading Plato. Right. Let me make that clear. I was reading Plato like a year and a half ago. I was reading I think it was one of the five dialogues. Yeah, it was the first of the five dialogues of Plato, which is all about Socrates's arrest, trial, and ultimate execution. And as I was sitting there thinking about it, I realized, ironically, the ancients might do better in our modern day than we do, for this reason and this reason alone. They understood a world that was polytheistic. They understood that, and not to say that that is the correct view, but to say that that is how they understood the world. Whereas all of us don't, in that we largely grew up in a world dominated by monotheistic religion, specifically Christianity, writ large. And once this clicked for me, I would start to ask the question, and then sometimes I would quote tweet something or reply to something or say it is, which God? God help us, right? Somebody might say. Which God? Ask yourself, what God is somebody actually talking about? Is it the God, or is it a God? Is it something that they consider to be a God? And so the ancients, who had all these different gods that they would try to appease at one point in time or another, it occurred to me, I'm not saying I'm right, let me know what you think. It occurred to me that maybe they had a better insight into how to navigate the world of today, given that we have so many gods in our current culture. You might not like that idea. You might think God is stupid. You might think that there's only one God. I would agree with that. But that doesn't change what other people believe, right? There's everybody wants to objectify reality, but you can only get to the objective through the subjective. That's just obvious, right? Especially in that we're trying to have a conversation. Ultimately, if I'm trying to convince you of something, there's two ways 3 ways? There's, what do I say all the time? There's at least 2 answers to every question. One of them could be the wrong answer, but that's still 2 answers, right? There can be objective things about the world, but we can only understand them through our subjective interpretation. And that collection of subjective interpretation turns into what many would call objective reality. This isn't to say that there isn't an objective reality. This is to say that only through that can we say that is. Don't believe me? What is a woman? Why is that a complicated question for people to answer? Just to be redundant for the sake of our conversation. And yet, you can only go so far to convince somebody of anything, especially the average person who ultimately will decide things. You can only go so far because somebody has to have a common frame of reference, and only in order to understand, you have to have a common frame of reference in order to understand where somebody else is coming from. Let's look to scripture for a second. I don't know the chapter and verse, forgive me, but there is in the epistles of Paul, there is the story, maybe it's Corinth? I don't think it's Corinth. I just said that because I know that's in Greek. And I know there was a Greek community, and they had an altar dedicated to the unknown God. And the basic point of the epistle and the story was that, well, that is actually God. The one that you said was unknown is actually this God, the risen Lord. So in that sense, and again, determining objectivity through the subjective, through the consensus of the subjective, is to say that without that frame of reference, those people would have never come to Christ, right? That's the message, broadly speaking, of what I'm referring to in the Bible. So too, when it comes to our modern political parlance, there's only so far you can go. Now, what's crazy about modern political discussions is that we live in this age of the internet, and I think there's so many problems with technology. Yes, of course there are problems with technology. One of those problems is this idea that I've toyed with in my mind, and we'll talk about it a little bit here, of distributed culture. See, unlike most political commentators out there, I was always very concerned with what culture was, again, in a philosophical sense, in a basic sense. What is it? What is this actual thing? This thing we call culture, beliefs, rituals, and practices of a given group of people. And so therefore you have to answer the question of what is a belief, what are rituals, and what are practices, and how do they distinguish, and how do those make up a people? All of these important things for this word that's bandied about ad nauseum of culture. How do we win the culture? How do we beat the culture? How do we create our own culture? Leaving all that aside, because that would take a long time, and frankly, I would need a little more notes. I would need some more notes to be able to properly walk people through it. Let's presume that we know what we're talking about. And just, I want to bring up this idea again of distributed culture. And I think the internet has created this, and it's not good. To blend and introduce another metaphor, what's the difference between a single instrument, a band, and a symphony? Hopefully this starts to elucidate my point here. So distributed culture, the idea of distributed culture, as I'm trying to talk about it right now, has something to do with, in the advent of remote work, you have a distributed workforce, right? And that means that all these people in different locations are all working towards the same goal and vision as a single unit. But they're not next to each other. They don't even interact with each other. They push towards the same thing. And I think about what the world was before that, and it was closer to what a symphony is, right? A symphony are all these are multiples of the same kind, but all these different kinds of instruments working together to create one piece of music. And I think that is what culture is supposed to be, and still is to some extent. But here's the tie-in. Here's where it connects. If at one point in time, and this is for good or for ill, right? There's two answers to every question. This is my method. This is the way that I try and look at the world. But specifically is, what was the world before the internet? Well, it was a world where, in many respects, you didn't have a choice with who your neighbors were and who your friends were. It just had a lot to do. And even today, most of your friendships, unless you're terminally online, are a result of your proximity. Relationships are a result of proximity by and large. Isn't that a funny thing about us as human beings? Have you ever had a friend? You probably have a friend right now that you don't actually have a lot of shared interests with. You probably have one or two. You might have a family member with whom you have no shared interests, and yet you spend an inordinate amount of time with that person compared to somebody else with whom you don't share any interests with. At least I hope you do, because that's what I'm driving at. What the internet did was it created a space for distributed culture to exist. Suddenly, if you were that one incredibly esoteric person, you could find that other esoteric people all around the world, and you guys could be esoteric together. If you had a particularly weird fetish, you can go online. You would have to keep that locked down, right? Because people wouldn't want to know that about you. And yet now you can find other people with that same fetish and be proud about who you are. Why is it that we all understand that there is a certain subset of people who like to dress up as dogs in leather? The answer to that, in part, is a distributed culture. And so, in a country who for generations have been taught that what we are is an idea, a proposition, we actually can't answer what it is to be an American, not even you people who are trying to claim our heritage, reclaim our heritage. Which, by the way, I'm on your side, for the record. Once upon a time, the parochial would never leave their home. Now the various sects of parochial people can again bandy together and talk about only parochial concerns. How does that affect how everybody, the average, the people, through the collective subjective through to create the objective, how does that help us, or does it hurt us? I don't know exactly. What I do know is that we're driven by incentive. What I do know is that we are the makers of our own destiny and destruction. And what I also know is that there's not a lot we can do to change the trajectory that we're on. All I can try to do with you is understand it so that we can be better prepared for it. So I hope you liked this. I hope you join me as I continue to produce content and create more. Like this, just I don't care about. I like. It'd be great if you share the show, but if you listen to this, do me a favor, drop a heart on the Substack. If you want, make sure you go to dinnerwake.com, subscribe with your email address, and follow me on all social media at the LB.
The mission
of better sense making continues. Go to beingawake.com and subscribe today for future broadcasts.